Okay, you guys, this is from Substack, the daily news from the Art of Liberty Foundation. Scientology, the CIA, and MK Ultra. August 17th, from Etienne de la Boete. The first in a series investigating the intelligence connections to the Church of Scientology since its founding, including drug trafficking operations. By Mark Goodwin. The majority of current discourse on Scientology centers around insider revelations regarding the radical belief system coded within the pay-to-play hierarchy of the church, e.g., allusions to an alien god named Xenu, hydrogen bombs, exploding in ancient volcanoes, auditing sessions with e-meters, and parasitic past lives in spirit form covering human bodies known as Satans. The deeper secrets of Scientology are only made available to members who have diligently climbed the ranks and dished out vast sums of money. Slowly but surely, these secrets have been published on the internet by disgruntled ex-Scientologists, and thus the discussions surrounding this controversial religion have been commandeered into sensational silos, whether intentional or not. The end result is that the immense ties of the church to intelligence and drug trafficking, not to mention the intersection of both as it relates to the CIA's MKUltra mind control program, remain largely ignored. Facts. Scientology's methods and their extremely pervasive effects on the minds of its own cult members only truly begin to make sense when understood within the context of the non-redacted history of founder L. Ron Hubbard, including the church's primordial Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation, connections to the intelligence community, and Hubbard's own intelligence career. His role in under-discussed operations on the behalf of U.S. naval and other intelligence agencies include Hubbard's work at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. in the 1930s. The hotbed of psychiatric research during Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke. The precursors to the infamous MKUltra program, in addition to his infiltration of Jack Parsons' occult-influenced rocket program, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, whose work became the scientific foundation for NASA. In 1953, the MKUltra program was formally authorized by CIA Director Alan Dulles in order to close the brainwashing gap after the U.S. learned of Korean mind control techniques that had been used on American prisoners of war. As detailed later in this investigation, Scientology itself would later employ such tactics to direct fanatical members of the church to infiltrate a handful of U.S. agencies, including the IRS, the Treasury, and the FDA, among others, to enact an elaborate intelligence gathering operation in the largest infiltration of the U.S. government in history, Operation Snow White. This piece, the first in a two-part series, attempts to abridge the history of the Church of Scientology from its formation through the mid-1990s in order to properly frame an ensuing article on Scientologist Sky Dayton and his numerous internet businesses strewn across his prolific data mining venture portfolio. Ultimately, Scientology is far more than just another run-of-the-mill religion. In fact, its mostly untold history paints a picture of an organization that much more closely resembles a tax-exempt intelligence operation, signed off by the highest members of the CIA and its primordial OSS, then a wacky cult of alien worshippers invented by a pulp science fiction author. St. Elizabeth, the OSS, and Project Artichoke. Remember one thing, we are not running a business. We are running a government. We are in direct control of people's lives. L. Ron Hubbard, policy letter from August 5th, 1959. Don't you guys wonder where he'd get an idea like that? Lafayette Ronald Hubbard was born March 13, 1911 in Tilden, Nebraska, the son of a teacher and a U.S. Navy officer. Hubbard spent his early childhood on various Navy bases. You guys seeing the connections? Including a lengthy stay in the U.S. territory of Guam before authoring the concepts of Dianetics and founding Scientology. Hubbard was a well-published science fiction author. Hubbard began his ventures into the study of the mind after sailing alongside the former Navy spy and pioneering yet controversial psychoanalyst, Commander Joseph Snake Thompson. His father, Harry Ross Hubbard, was ordered to return to the East Coast, and thus the Hubbard family was deployed alongside Thompson on the USS Ulysses S. Grant in 1923, despite the young Hubbard being only 12 years old at the time of meeting. The two engaged in friendly correspondence for years. Hubbard later attended George Washington University to study engineering, but would leave before graduating. Yeah, and go check out his academic records. How would he get into a prestigious university like that? You got to ask questions like that. Hubbard encountered and befriended William Alanson White, a professor of psychiatry. Isn't that interesting? At the university. For the remainder of the 1930s, Hubbard stayed in Washington, D.C., and volunteered with the psychiatric community in the nation's capital, including alongside White, who was then also serving as the superintendent of St. Elizabeth's Hospital. His former shipmate, Thompson, soon became the vice president of Washington Psychoanalytic Association, of which White was president, and was also stationed at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Scientologist John Galusha later penned a letter to the FBI in 1954 stating that Hubbard was trained in psychoanalysis in Washington, D.C. by both Thompson and White. Hold on. In a lecture given in June 1955, Hubbard himself confirmed this membership. And I came back to this very city in which we're giving this Congress. And I took engineering and majored in that engineering. Infinite energies, and thought of the finest energy I could think of. It must be the human mind. Notice he was a child of a Navy person. Experimented to discover how memory was stored, and found by no computation I could ever compute that a man couldn't remember. Certainly by this computation, more than 3 months worth, because there wasn't that much storage space, because energies weren't that small. And I was proposed as a young engineer a conundrum of such magnitude that I went over to my very good friend, the head of St. Elizabeth's Hospital, Dr. William Allen White. He said, if you pursue along this line, he was a golf friend of mine, and if you pursue along this line, he said, you tell me about it from time to time, he says, because I'll be watching. Now, another fellow who has been more or less my mentor when I was a little kid. As a matter of fact, I followed in the footsteps of this man, Commander Thompson, who brought psychoanalysis straight from Vienna. What else goes on in Vienna? Wakey, wakey. Psychoanalysis straight from Vienna to the U.S. Navy and introduced psychoanalysis into the Navy. I told Commander Thompson about this work. I tried to get more information, and when I had turned to Commander Thompson and Dr. Allen White, I had turned to the only two probables in the country who could have shed any light on this subject at all. Despite a fondness for his former teacher, White's successor at St. Elizabeth's, Winfried Overholser, became an object of Hubbard's hatred. Following Overholser's dismissal of his Dianetic research, Hubbard lectured in 1952 about the dangers of Overholser's treatment of schizophrenics at the hospital's Chestnut Lodge. The lecture even includes mention that 3 members of the staff from the Chestnut Lodge were sent to service Hubbard himself during the 1930s. This overlaps with CIA activity at Chestnut Lodge, which directly involved Overholser, according to the CIA in 1942. Then OSS Chief William Donovan assembled a half-dozen prestigious American scientists. Don't you wonder how Hubbard got thrown into this? Tasked to come up with a substance that could break down the psychological defense of captured spies and POWs in order to cause an uninhibited disclosure of classified information. Overholser was appointed chairman of the panel working on this truth drug. Very similar to a lie detector, isn't it? According to a University of London research paper titled The Role of Psychoanalytic Knowledge in CIA's Artichoke and MK-Ultra documents, during the years 1947 to 1963, use and misuse of psychoanalytic techniques, the Chestnut Lodge held CIA-cleared psychiatrists for in-house employees in other sensitive cases and was officially approved by the CIA Security Office for the use in 1953. The paper asserts that the collaboration between U.S. intelligence and Chestnut Lodge psychiatrists and psychoanalysts had begun even earlier during World War II. For example, Chestnut Lodge employees Mabel B. Cohen, Robert A. Cohen, and Alfred H. Stanton were all security cleared OSS medical personnel. Where have we heard OSS before? Who were at the time assigned to Henry A. Murray's OSS assessment staff. The paper also states, excuse me. The paper also states that some of their OSS assignments were conducted at the lodge and that this collaboration continued when the CIA superseded the OSS in 1947. St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the Chestnut Lodge, and the CIA's headquarters at Langley are all within a few miles of each other. And two CIA directors, Richard Helms and Alan Dulles, employed the same psychoanalyst at the Chestnut Lodge for their personal care. A photograph of St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Remember how I mentioned hospitals earlier with the CASM? A published memo from Paul Gaynor, the CIA Security Research Chief, to Project Artichoke, Director Morse Allen, reads, "It is imperative that we move forward more aggressively on identifying and securing a more reliable reality or ready group or groups of human research subjects for ongoing artichoke work. According to the Alliance for Human Research Protection, the now defunct Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, HEW, was created in 1953, the same year as the aforementioned memo was written, and the CIA found it remarkably easy to gain HEW's approval for use of federal medical facilities as fronts for covert, DRUG, and interrogation experiments using unwitting human subjects. Go check out the book Poisoner in Chief about Gottlieb and all his buddies. Allen later suggested to Gaynor in another memo titled Artichoke Research Program that there are some 4,000 American military men, there's that 4 again, who are serving court-martial sentences in the federal prisons at the present time. And he suggested offering reduced sentences to these men in order to gain their consent to participate in artichoke-related experimentation. About a week later, Allen tweaked the aforementioned memo to include federal hospitals and institutions under the control of U.S. Public Health Service. Shortly after, artichoke progress reports were sent to the CIA via Gaynor about the experiments at 3 federal prisons, in addition to experiments conducted at Hubbard's former haunt, St. Elizabeth's Hospital. I'm pretty sure Hubbard made a lot of trips to Washington, D.C. as well. The aforementioned OSS agent in charge of St. Elizabeth's staff, Henry A. Murray, later joined Harvard as a researcher where he conducted the infamous Harvard experiment, whose research subjects include Theodore Kaczynski, more famously known as the Unabomb, you-know-what. Well, I want to say so much, but not allowed. In addition to supervising Timothy Leary's controversial work with psychedelic DRUGS, Leary's deeper connections to Scientology must just be a coincidence, and intelligence will be explored later in this piece. Murray remained secretly employed by the CIA during this time, leading many to theorize that Murray's work were conducted as a part of MKUltra or related projects. Murray was far from being the only intelligence-linked figure who served in a prominent role at Chestnut Lodge. For instance, Harry Stack Sullivan, the one-time head psychiatrist at Chestnut Lodge and founder of the William Alanson White Institute, left the hospital before helping establish a CIA precursor, the Office of War Information, in 1942. In a lecture titled How to Handle Audiences, delivered by Hubbard on November 1st, 1956, the church's founder confirmed his 1930 stint at the D.C. area mental hospital and even boasted of tricking the workers at St. Elizabeth's using advanced hypnotism. I hypnotized one time the staff at St. Elizabeth's, told him they'd heard a good speech, and left the stage. They all came around afterwards saying, "What a good speech that you gave." They might afterwards have suspected my knowledge of the mind, but certainly not my knowledge of hypnotism. It's very easy to hypnotize groups. At the onset of World War II, Hubbard himself enlisted in the Navy after his stint at St. Elizabeth's. What do they mean, stint? You guys wonder what they mean by stint? People don't just show up in places like that. There is much discrepancy about his rank and accomplishments during the war, but by nearly all accounts, including critical biographers and the church itself, well, we can't trust that, Hubbard served as an intelligence officer. Yeah, I've read this numerous places. I've been bringing this up since I got into all this Scientology stuff. In 1945, upon the war's conclusion, Hubbard moved into an estate in Pasadena, California, owned by Jack Parsons, the aforementioned founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The parsonage. John Whiteside Parsons was born in Pasadena, California. Pasadena might be somewhere to look into. In 1914, and spent his early life reading science fiction and emulating his desires for space travel in his backyard with model rockets and fireworks with his childhood friend, Edward Foreman. After numerous craters were made in his mother's backyard, and while still enrolled in high school, Parsons joined the Hercules Powder Company and began experimenting with solid-fueled rockets. He later left Hercules and, along with his childhood friend Foreman, joined the Halifax Explosives Company, based in the Mojave Desert. During their time at Halifax, in 1937, both of the aspiring rocketeers attended a lecture on the subject at Caltech, where they met Frank Molina. Parsons, Foreman, and Molina went on to pitch Theodore von Karman of the Guggenheim. Oh, that's like a high-up name. Guggenheim is a very significant name. Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratories of the California Institute of Technology, GALCIT, on their ideas of rocket propulsion, with Molina's proposal for a doctorate eventually being approved by the legendary Aerodynamics. The trio, now with access to the labs and literature available via Caltech and GALCIT, began their experiments in earnest with their infamous explosive tendencies, earning them the name Bluicide Squad. Their work formed the basis of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, on the outskirts of Parsons' hometown. As mentioned previously, the JPL was eventually incorporated into NASA, and Molina's son, Roger Molina, the husband of Christine Maxwell, the daughter of Robert Maxwell and sister to Jeffrey Epstein's accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, later served as the director of this new joint venture. So much I want to say, but I'm not allowed to talk about that stuff here. Galset, August 12th, 1941. From left to right. I'm not going to go through that. You guys can read that later. Long before the JPL was formalized under the executive branch, Parsons and his crew received funding from the U.S. Army in 1938 to develop rocket engines to assist in the launch of small aircraft. The military was pleased with the results on their JATO canisters, jet-assisted takeoff, and funneled more money towards developing these fuel sources. The solid rocket fuel that had been developed by Parsons became the basis of the Minuteman missile, the Titan rocket, and the Space Shuttle solid rocket booster. Despite by nearly all metrics, the success of the primordial JPL, then known as the Galset Rocket Project, Parsons soon turned his eye away from the stars and in 1939 began focusing on the works of English occultist Aleister Crowley. Crowley, a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, joined the Ordo Templo Orientis in 1910. A Freemasonry offshoot that was quickly influenced by the Crowley's interest in his Thelemic religion, occult ceremonies, and sex magic. Parsons and his then-wife, Helene Northrup, joined the OTO in 1939. And Parsons engaged in frequent correspondence with Crowley, eventually becoming the American representative of the OTO. In order to further his study of Crowley's teachings and the OTO, Parsons purchased a mansion in Pasadena to create a commune of occultists he dubbed the Parsonage. The manor soon became a hotbed of lavish parties. O word, I'm not going to say the O word. Does it remind you of P. Diddy? I digress. And occult rituals. Meanwhile, the military continued to pour funding into the Galset Rocket Project. And in 1942, the rocket builders founded the Aerojet Engineering Company to keep up with the increasing demand for militarized propulsion. The next year, in 1943, the military formally took over the Galset Rocket Project and renamed in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, now under military control. JPL developed several weapon deployment systems based on the liquid and solid fuel technology, including the WAC Corporal Sounding Rocket, which played a large part in the construction of the first American rocket ever to exit the Earth's atmosphere, allegedly. As his interest in the occult deepened, the military became wary of Parsons' ways and strong-armed him into unloading his shares of the Aerojet Engineering Company. The ensuing payout provided further funding for his spiritual life and the parsonage itself, At this time, in 1945, L. Ron Hubbard became acquainted with Parsons and was quickly initiated into the OTO. You guys ever wonder what bloodlines these folks come from? Hubbard subsequently moved into Parsons' Pasadena estate. Of course, he didn't have his own place. In a letter to Crowley describing Hubbard, Parsons wrote, "I deduce that he is in direct touch with some higher intelligence. He is the most thelemic person I have ever met and is in complete accord with our own principles." Remember what I told you about how they can take people out? I'm just making a statement. Notice that he's taken out and then boom, the mom's gone too. I'm just making an observation. Hubbard and Parsons soon became inseparable, with the pair even sharing Parsons' then partner Sarah Northrup, the half-sister of Parsons' first wife, Helen. In the winter and spring of 1946, Parsons and Hubbard toiled on a series of occult rituals in the Mojave Desert, dubbed Babylon Working, in which the pair attempted to incarnate the Thelemite goddess Babylon onto Earth. Shortly after its conclusion, and having believed the ritual to be a success, Parsons sold the parsonage for cash and looked to Hubbard for business concepts to pay back the hefty expenses from their years of occult investigations. Hubbard promptly took nearly all the funds from the sale of the estate. Typical, right? As well as Parsons' wife, Sarah. The pair then eloped in Mexico. While Parsons did eventually get his money back, Hubbard, Sarah, and Parsons' sailboat continued on without him. In 1950, Parsons lost his security clearance after the FBI began investigating the occult scientist for the theft of rocket plans. Allegedly, he stole them, you guys. He probably created them. Plans which the Bureau claimed Parsons had planned to exchange with the newly founded Israeli government in exchange for admission into Israel. Looks like he was trying to run to safety, doesn't it? The U.S. Air Force told the FBI that they had been monitoring Parsons in his relationship with Crowley. Go look into how many people were into Crowley, you guys. Believed to advocate sexual perversion, was organized at subject's home at 1003 South Orange Grove Avenue, Pasadena, California, which has been reported subversive. According to statements made by the church in December 1969 to the Sunday Times, Hubbard was sent by the U.S. Navy to break up black magic in America. The church wrote, can a church write anything, you guys? Does anybody know here? Can a church write stuff? Someone at the church. The church wrote he went to live at the house and investigated the black magic rites. He investigated the black magic rites in the situation and found them very bad. Hubbard rescued a girl they were using, sure. The black magic group was dispersed and destroyed, right. In 1952, Parsons died suspiciously in an explosion at his workshop. Hours after the explosion, Parsons' mother, Ruth, purposely overdosed on sedatives and blanked the same day. It's really convenient, isn't it? Shortly after splitting from Parsons and settling in with his now wife, Sarah, Hubbard penned the beginnings of his life work with Scientology, then known as Dianetics, publishing his first work on the subject in May 1950. And didn't it go straight to the bestsellers list, you guys? Did not pass go, it just went straight to the best-selling list. Dianetics and the CIA's influence on Scientology. Their influence, you guys. Initially published as an article in the Astounding Science Fiction magazine's May 1950 issue, Dianetics, The Evolution of Science, was written by Hubbard over 3 weeks on an IBM typewriter. In April 1950, a month before the release of the article, the magazine's editor, John W. Campbell, an extremely important figure in the blossoming science fiction scene, having mentored and published Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, and Hubbard, among others, worked with Hubbard to coalesce the pre-publication hype into a foundation to spread its teachings. This culminated in the founding of the Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation. Coincidentally, the same month, the CIA's mind control program, Project Bluebird, was authorized by the CIA. According to letters from John Galusha, a board member of the Hubbard Association of Scientologists International, later released by the FBI, the idea for the formation of the Dianetics Research Foundation was suggested by Charles Parker Morgan. In a declassified report from the FDA, file cited by ex-Scientologist investigator Mike McClaughry, the Dianetic Research Foundation was incorporated in New Jersey. In April 1950, as a nonprofit scientific and educational corporation, the primary purpose of which is to do research in the field of Dianetics and for the correction of all psychosomatic ills of mankind. The report lists Hubbard as president, Parker Morgan as secretary and general counsel, Campbell as treasurer, alongside Sarah Hubbard and Donald H. Rogers as trustees of the foundation. The same report also lists Parker Morgan as a former special agent for the FBI, while his name also appears on a government-hosted list of OSS agents, confirming the primordial intelligence ties to the formation of Scientology. An FBI memo from the L. Ron Hubbard files dated March 21st, 1951, also refers to Donald H. Rogers, the director of research at the newly formed foundation, as a former FBI agent. You guys putting the dots together now? In January 1951, the New Jersey State Board of Medical Examiners filed a lawsuit against the foundation, and Hubbard found himself in need of a new operational strategy for Dianetics. According to both McClaughry and the Royal Mace, two separate intelligence officers suggested that Hubbard incorporate Dianetics as a religion as a defense mechanism against these lawsuits. They were the aforementioned OSS FBI agent Charles Parker Morgan and John Starr Cook. In The Game Player by ex-CIA agent Miles Copeland, Copeland describes his political influence work with fellow agent Bob Mandelstam, which they referred to as occultism in high places, or OHP. OHP was a theory of political activism based on an impressively detailed study of ways in which leaders of the world base their judgments on one form or another of divine guidance. Copeland further described the duo's theory that properly charismatized leaders placed in certain positions in the free world's key bureaucracy could be used as political levers by which an enlightened American foreign policy could uplift the world, which would enable a properly employed CIA to fulfill the Wilsonian pledge to make the world safe for democracy. Be safe, be safe. While removing certain goings-on here and there were inconveniencing the American way of life. Consider, for example, the influence of presidential spiritual advisors, such as Ronald Reagan's astrologer, Joan Quigley, or Choi Soon-sil over former South Korean President Park Geun-hye. Copeland specifically mentions such arrangements with the Church of Scientology. When Bob Mandelstam made similar arrangements with Scientology, the brainchild of another nut, this one a science fiction writer named Ron Hubbard, we were on our way to having a political action capability which would make the highly expensive, largely ineffective, and largely covert action of Bill Casey's CIA seem trivial by comparison. MRA will hit 'em high, and the Church of Scientology will hit 'em low, Bob liked to boast, and he was right. We planted an agent in the Scientology cult who became a clear under the tutelage of Ron Hubbard himself, and then demanded and got more and more operation expenses to be turned over, in addition to his own life savings, to the cause of Dianetics. The 1995 book Acid Dreams by Martin Lee and Bruce Schlein confirms the agency's infiltration, suggests that the aforementioned John Starr Cook had been the CIA proxy sent by Copeland and Mandelstam. A man of wealth and influential family connections, Cook was no stranger to high-level CIA personnel. His sister Alice, to whom he was very close, was married to Roger Kent, a prominent figure in the California State Democratic Party. Roger's brother, Sherman Kent, was head of the CIA's National Board of Estimates, an extremely powerful position, and served as CIA Director Alan Dulles' right-hand man during the Cold War. John Cook hobnobbed with Sherman Kent at annual family reunions and is said to have made the acquaintance of a number of CIA operatives while traveling in Europe. Driven by an avid interest in the occult, must be a coincidence, Cook journeyed around the world befriending an assortment of mystics and spiritual teachers. In the early 1950s, he became a close confidant of L. Ron Hubbard, the ex-Navy officer who founded the Scientology organization. Cook rose high in the ranks of the newly formed religious cult. He was the first clear in America, meaning he had attained the level of an advanced Scientology initiate. Before long, however, he grew disillusioned with Hubbard and they parted ways. He found out he was a fraud, in my opinion. Cook moved back to California and became an important pillar pillar in the blossoming occult scene. With numerous connections to Timothy Leary, the CIA, and many of the chemists and traffickers associated with the LSD movement, Cook died at his home in Cuernavaca, Mexico in 1976, almost like he was on the run for something. But not before being visited by Andrija Puharich, an ex-military scientist and researcher, and Seymour the Head Lazare, a longtime affiliate of William Mellon Hitchcock, who will be discussed shortly. Puharich was famous for his study on parapsychological phenomenon and attempted to find military applications of such practices of remote viewing and telekinesis. His work led to the founding of the Stanford Research Institute, which employed high-ranking Scientologists Hal Puthoff, Ingo Swann, Pat Price, and Eli Primrose. Puthoff had worked for the National Security Agency and Swann for the United Nations. Oh, I want to say so much. Their research eventually merged under the CIA's infamous Project Stargate, was directly supervised at Langley by John McMahon, the second in command under CIA Director William Casey. Many of the SRI empaths were mustered from L. Ron Hubbard's Church of Scientology. According to a December 1996 report from the Alex Constantine titled CIA Mind Control at Stanford Research Institute. Remember how when Jamie Muster talked about when the FBI raided Scientology and saw the kids in the condition they were in? Harold Puthoff, the Institute's senior researcher, was a leading Scientologist. Two remote viewers from SRI have also held the rank in the church: Ingo Swann, a Class 7 operating Thetan, a founder of the Scientology Center in Los Angeles, and the late Pat Price. Puthoff and Targ's lab assistant was a Scientologist married to a minister of the church. When Swann joined SRI, he stated openly, 14 clears participated in the experiments, more than I would suspect. At the time, he denied CIA involvement, but now acknowledges it was rather common knowledge all along who the sponsor was, although in documents, the identity of the agency was concealed behind the sobriquet of an East Coast scientist. According to the CIA, the SRI's work was funded by the CIA, the Parsons-founded Jet Proposal Laboratory, now within NASA. I'm not an expert on this, but it sounds like Parsons came up with something pretty amazing, and then all of a sudden he just ended up feet up in the air. ARPA and the military, the CIA, and the Church of Scientology had become direct partners in their advancement of psychic and paranormal research by the 1970s. However, the groundwork for this relationship appears to have started years earlier. Given numerous connections between the CIA's LSD trafficking scheme and Hubbard's newly formed personal navy, the ones with child slaves, the Sea Organization. Feels good to be validated. TRUG running, LSD, and the Sea Org. I give the CIA a total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events in the 1960s. Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary, a student of former St. Elizabeth staff. Are you guys putting it all together now? I'm not retaining all this, but I'm just saying. The student of former St. Elizabeth staff and OSS CIA agent Henry A. Murray became an FBI informant with numerous connections to the CIA over the course of his psychedelic missionary work across the United States. For starters, the estate where Leary conducted much of his LSD experiments was gifted to him by the Melton banking family. Banking. William Billy Hitchcock, after being visited numerous times by family friend and eventual CIA director Richard Helms. This is where Gottlieb was. Gottlieb was doing a lot of these experiments. The Mellon family and many family members serve in the OSS, including OSS Station Chief of London, David Bruce, who was coincidentally the son-in-law, of former U.S. Treasury Secretary. You guys seeing what I'm seeing? Andrew Mellon, Hitchcock himself, had ties to intelligence-linked blackmail operations. Such as the Profumo affair, and he also held an account at Castle Bank and Trust, a mob-affiliated bank. Oh, man. Oh, what a web we weave. Bank founded in the Bahamas by the CIA banker Paul Hellawell. In addition, he was a frequent guest at Resorts International owned properties, known infamous meeting grounds of the mob, offshore bankers, and the CIA. Hitchcock concurrently had served as a banker and financial advisor to the LSD cult and drug operation. The Brotherhood of Eternal Love, Bell. There's Timothy Leary and Billy Hitchcock, both doing LSD. Hitchcock evicted Leary off his estate in 1967, but shortly thereafter, in the spring of 1968, Hitchcock traveled to the Bahamas with LSD chemist and Bell member Nick Sand. Sand had been appointed the alchemist of Leary's League for Spiritual Discovery, a religion formed in September 1966 that incorporated psychedelic drugs as sacraments. Sand's chemistry operation, culminating in the infamously pure LSD known as Orange Sunshine, were a product of a long-time partnership with David Montel. A Scientologist who studied directly under Hubbard's successor, David Miscavige. So I clicked on continue reading, and it just went in a loop. So I'm going to leave the link in the description box. Like and subscribe if you choose. Have an amazing day or night wherever you are. Peace.